Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jerry O'Keefe, an AUSA Senior Fellow. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this contemporary military forum titled Delivering Ready Combat Power, Taking Care of People. As your professional association, the Association of the United States Army is proud to provide forums like this one throughout the year that broaden the knowledge base for Army professionals and those who support the Army. AUSA amplifies the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside the Army and helps to further the association's mission to be the voice for the Army, support for the soldier. Of course, AUSA cannot do this alone. AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support our soldiers and our families. A strong membership base is vitally important for AUSA's advocacy efforts for Congress, the Pentagon, and the Defense Industrial Base, and to the public and communities across the country through AUSA's 122 chapters within the United States and 9 in other countries. Thank you for your continued support of AUSA. If you are a new member and want to learn more about your benefits, or if you want to upgrade your membership status from basic to premium, be sure to visit AUSA's membership booth located in the West Salon across from registration, or visit ausa.org. And of course, it's now Wednesday afternoon, so the membership booth will be open for a couple more hours, but the website is a great source. For our panel, on behalf of General Brown, seated here in the front, AUSA's President and CEO, there is a small token of our appreciation located at the tables by each of your seats. Today's panel will be moderated by Ms. Patty Barron, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy. Before we begin our panel discussion, please let me introduce our opening speaker, General Charles R. Hamilton, the 21st Commanding General of U.S. Materiel Command. As the AMC commander, General Hamilton manages a $300 billion portfolio and leads a worldwide workforce of 162,000 soldiers, civilians, and contractors who deliver precision sustainment and material readiness to an expeditionary global force from the Joint Strategic Support Area to the tactical point of contact, while ensuring soldier, civilian, and family readiness. With a presence or impact in all 50 states and in more than 150 countries around the world, AMC provides the capability to generate, project, and sustain our Army's combat power whenever and wherever it is needed. AMC ensures the Army remains the best equipped and best sustained fighting force in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, General Charles Hamilton.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for that introduction. So number one, I don't do all that by myself. I don't have $50 billion sitting in my office, and I've got about 160,000+ folks that help me do that around the globe. But first I want to say thanks to General Brown, great friend, mentor, and just doing a great job in leading AUSA. I love the rollout of the new logo. That is awesome. I think our soldiers and families will appreciate that. To my good friend Les, who's somewhere in the audience, thanks for your leadership and friendship, as well, and for what you guys do. And I just want to thank everyone who is attending and those viewing online for your service and support to our Army as well. As you may know, one of the Chief's 4 focus areas is delivering ready combat formations. Look, he didn't waste any time in rolling that out, and in fact tasked me about 2 weeks before he took over as chief. And so we started to put a lot of things in motion, and you're going to hear a little bit about that. And I won't be up here long. We want to get to the panel and all their great remarks and questions. But really, it means getting what our soldiers need to the fight anywhere in the world, and then more importantly, we got to sustain them from those locations. It supports our national ability to project strength. It means that our soldiers, their families, our formations, and our installations as well, and the industrial base, which many of you, especially our great contractors out there and vendors, are a part of that, keeping us prepared and ready. And I'm reminded all the time, and I say this as many times as I get the opportunity, sustainment is about war fighting, period. And that also means that taking care of people is about war fighting, because it all feeds into readiness. So improving housing, conditions and transforming the military health system is about war fighting as well. Providing quality and affordable child care programs and improving spouse employment is about war fighting also. And then continuing to improve the PCS process and emphasize our quality of life resources and installations with critical needs, I submit, is about war fighting. And these just aren't simply afterthoughts. They're the foundation of our ability to deliver combat-ready formations. And that's why this panel is really so important today. And again, I want to thank them for agreeing to sign up to do this. We got Joan Jones, we got Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Ms. Patty Barron, we got Jim Eisenhower and his wife Cheryl, and they're really on the forefront, and want to thank them for all they do every day, especially on the policy side, and then the rest of you on the execution side of making this happen. But before I turn things over to this outstanding panel, I just want to make a few points. First, the Army is in a unique position in how we manage installations. We've only had this approach since 2001, when we centralized installation management across the Army. And I got to tell you, it's a massive task. I spent a lot of time in this space, as you can imagine. We have 80 Army installations worldwide, and they're the Army's home, and they enable readiness, sustainment, and very important quality of life. And we spent a lot of time talking about that this morning with the Secretary, the Chief, and the Sergeant Major of the Army. And as you can imagine, I've had the opportunity to live in a few of these houses and on bases around the world. They do provide convenience, they provide savings, a safe and supportive community for our soldiers, their families, to live, work, and also to have fun. And so for our soldiers with families, we have nearly 100,000 homes on our installations, ranging from apartments to townhouses to single-family homes, multiple bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, and large living spaces. So more than 86,000 of these are privatized, and over 13,000 are owned and leased by the Army. More than 19,000 of these privatized homes will be replaced or renovated by 2026. And then more than 2,000 of the Army-owned homes will be replaced or renovated by 2028. So just in 5 years, more than 1/5 of our entire inventory of housing will essentially be brand new. So we are spending our dollars very, very wisely. Part of that inventory, and I don't know if General Richardson is in here, is our new development at U.S. Army Garrison, Miami, home of U.S. Southern Command. For years, soldiers have lacked any housing options when assigned to SOUTHCOM. And that area is densely populated with a very high cost of living. So renting a house or apartment anywhere near the facility is challenging, to say the least. And this is just one example. But our new housing complex will be directly in front of the command headquarters, so soldiers can literally walk across the street to work. It will have 60 apartments, 48 townhomes, 24 duplexes, and 7 single-family homes. For our single soldiers at our installations worldwide, we have more than 6,700 barracks buildings with enough space for 480,000 individual unaccompanied soldiers. So nearly 80% of these buildings at or above what we classify as being good or adequate condition. And we've increased our standards. But it does not mean more than 20% that aren't in good enough shape in that category. So we've increased the investment in barracks to more than $1 billion to $1.2 billion a year, with more than $5 billion to be spent on renovations and new constructions all the way up to 2027. So for example, for barracks at Fort Gordon alone, we plan to invest more than $1.6 billion on 86 modernization and restoration projects as part of our facilities investment plan. So fundamentally, delivering ready combat formation means that we must be committed to improving the quality of housing and amenities to better support the needs and lifestyles of our soldiers and their families. And we do that through Installation Management Command, senior commanders in the field, and our garrison commander teams. MCOM is responsible for integrating, delivering installation support across the Army. Senior mission commanders are responsible for the place and the actual installation. And I will tell you, Ms. Eisenhower can tell you, the senior commander's spouse plays a special role in representing the thousands of families on our installations. And third, garrison commanders are responsible for the people that provide the programs to our senior mission commanders. And this is all about our soldiers. They deserve our best. They deserve to work and live in safe and healthy environments, and they deserve access to quality programs and services in support of readiness and resilience. They deserve it, and with your help and with your leadership of men and women like our panelists today, it will be delivered. With that, I'll close and hand things over to the panel. We stand ready at Army Materiel Command to deliver ready combat formations. Be all you can be, and as the Chief says, this will defend. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here on a Wednesday afternoon. It's nice to see so many people in the room, and there really are a lot of people in the room. General Brown, thank you so much for hosting us. This is a great AUSA, so impressed with all of it. My name is Patty Barron. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy, and work very closely with these folks here on the panel. But what I can tell you is that I am an Army spouse, followed my soldier for 30 years, and do recognize how important it is to take care of people. I think that certainly my boss, Secretary Austin, makes taking care of people one of his top 3 priorities, and I know that the Secretary and the Chief of Staff of the Army do so as well. So without further ado, I would like to just announce the panels and then have them each introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Lieutenant General Omar Jones, and then we have General Eisenhower, and then we have Mrs. Cheryl Eisenhower. And General Eisenhower, you can tell that I completely forgot your first name. Please.
Whatever
Jim.
you want to do.
Jim Eisenhower. Excuse me for that. Sir, go ahead.
Well, first, it is great to be here. And General Brown's here, a little bit of feedback. We call it the meeting and exposition. I think we need to call it the reunion as well. As I look around the room, I think I've had the privilege of serving with at least half the folks that are here in the audience, to include my battalion commander, who is sitting here front and center, still taking notes, and I'm sure we'll have a good after-action review after the panel. But just as Patty said, Omar Jones, I have the privilege of commanding Installation Management Command, 60,000 professionals around the world supporting Army formations, soldiers for life, Army families on those 80 installations. An absolute privilege. I've been in command just over a year and had the privilege of serving as a deputy the year before that. I've also been an Army family member for the past 7 years, which gives me a different perspective that I hadn't experienced for the previous 24 years. 2 of my 3 sons in the Army, and my daughter-in-law is in the Army, and hearing from 2 lieutenants and a captain makes you appreciate the family programs even that much more. Just went over 31 years in the Army. My wife and I got married the day after I got commissioned. My wife Tracy has been on the entire Army journey with me, and as all of our spouses do, has kept me honest each and every step along the way. And the last comment on the reunion before I turn it over to General Eisenhower is the panelist. So I've known Dasdi Barron since I was a cadet, and she and her husband were serving at the U.S. Military Academy. And the Eisenhower family, we've had 5 assignments together over the past 31 years, to include Jim and I joining the Army together the same day. So hopefully we'll finish our sentences together this panel, but I'm very much looking forward to it. Jim?
Well, sure. Since you mentioned reunion, there's a micro reunion going on too, because I think it was 1998, maybe 1999, where Lieutenant Colonel Bob Brown joined 2 really handsome captains.
Really handsome.
In a radio show. In a radio show on a cold night in Srebrenica, Bosnia-Herzegovina. So it's neat to see us all just sitting right here. My name is Jim Eisenhower. I command 1st Armored Division in Fort Bliss, where today the average wait time at our pharmacies is 9 minutes. So keep that in mind before you close out the marketplace. And thanks to all the medical professionals that do that. But I joke I've been in the Army for 53 years. I'm not 70-something years old. I grew up in the Army. I've moved 29 times. This is my 29th move. So I've got to see a lot of military installations, certainly as they evolved since the 70s when I was growing up, running around, running from MPs, and getting later to a position where I'm enforcing standards. But I'm a proud father of 3 incredible young men, but most importantly, and what most people know me as, is Cheryl's husband. And you'll see how today I'm very clearly married way out of my league. Over to you.
Uh-oh, he set me up for failure, didn't he? But good afternoon, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'd like to thank AUSA for this opportunity. This conference has been fantastic. So you've knocked it out of the park. No surprise there, but it really has been the energy, the enthusiasm, the opportunity to come together and to share our strengths, to troubleshoot some of the weaknesses that we might have, and to create new ideas together is really awesome. And with that, I'd like to thank the military spouses who've provided their insights, their perspectives, and it's really been amazing. Thank you to MCOM for including the military spouse perspective on this panel. As Jim mentioned, and you figured out, this is my fine soldier right here. So we've been married almost 28 years. We got married on Veterans Day, which, pro tip, if you're a young military family, or young military soon-to-be family, not yet married, that's a good day to get married. Because if you're not deployed or in the field, you always have the day off. And as you mentioned, we're the proud parents of 3 young boys, or 3 seemingly young boys to me now, but one of them is making his way in New York City, living and loving life. One of them is a young lieutenant stationed at Fort Liberty, whose wife just deployed to the Middle East, so we're struggling with that change in dynamic. And then we also have one who's in the Navy. We still love him. 364 days out of the year.
That's right.
Yeah, but being a military mom, as Omar mentioned as well, is a change. Yeah. It gives you a new perspective. It helps me understand that even though they grew up in the military, there's still some things that I feel like they should know. But it reminds me that our young families don't always know the questions to ask and the ways in which to find those resources that we know are available.
Now, before Patty picks up, I told Jim in the green room we were in trouble having Cheryl on this panel, and you just heard why. So just please remember that when the questions come up, okay? So, yeah.
Absolutely. So, sir, we're going to start with you, and I just want to say that, Installation Management Command is such a vital part of the Army because you are the soul of taking care of people, and therefore that makes you an incredibly important part of, ready combat formations. And so I'd like to turn it over to you so you can kind of introduce the audience to what you do.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Please. So, I'm not sure, probably 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, to be honest, I could have spelled MCOM, but spent a lot of time, like many of you, on Army installations and was a customer, a recipient of all the things that MCOM does in support of senior commanders. But having been a senior commander here in the National Capital Region for Fort Meade, Meyer-Henderson Hall, Fort Belvoir, now Fort Walker down in Caroline County, deep appreciation for the science behind installation management, but also that effect, that positive effect for readiness, quality of life, and being the Army's home. And when you look at what our motto is, John, we can go to the next slide, please. Our motto, we are the Army's home. And I ask you to reflect on that a little bit. As you've experienced that reunion the past 3 days here, and you've met people and reconnected, usually in the first couple minutes of that conversation, you said, where are you living now? Where are you? And you answer that question with, here's my home. And for most soldiers and most Army family members, most soldiers for life, you define that home back to an installation. You just heard Jim say, what, 59?
This is 29.
29, it's 59, I would say, but 29 moves, 29 installations, but that common experience, where you live, the community, where you go to work from, where you feel safe, where you have neighbors, all of that is Installation Management Command's job to provide that home, that common experience on each and every one of those Army installations, tailored, as you've heard our Chief of Staff and Secretary talk about, to meet the local conditions of that installation, meet the directives of our local senior commander, but a common experience, to be that Army's home. So when a soldier is asked, where are you from? Army family members asked, where are you from? They could say, I'm from the Army. The Army is my home. That's our job, to provide that home. So 80 installations around the world, and you heard General Hamilton talk a little bit about this, what those installations do. 80 what I would call traditional installations, plus another 20 for the organic industrial base. Europe, across continental United States, Honduras, across the Indo-Pacific theater as well, to provide not only that home, but also support the readiness of Army formation so that they're ready to do what we need to do as an Army for the joint force, any place in the world in support of combatant commanders, to make sure we're ready today, but also ready tomorrow, which is a synonym for modernization, to make sure that we support that deployability. So those formations need to go someplace, whether it's to another training area here in the United States, another training area in the world, or deploy for an operation or contingency deployment around the world, to support that, to make sure they have all the things they need so that formation can deploy. And then just as you've heard the panel talk about so far, and you heard General Hamilton talk about, quality of life. Because quality of life for soldiers, quality of life for family members, quality of life for soldiers for life equals readiness. And readiness through talent attraction, making folks say, I really want to join the Army. Look how well the Army takes care of its people. And people that are in the Army saying, I want to stay. Because the Army is people. You saw that quote from General Crichton Abrams during the opening ceremony on Monday. And when we take care of our people, we are ready. And we're ready to do the things that are asked of us all around the world. Next slide, please. Next. The back one. Okay, so we'll talk this one. So if you know what we're for, being the Army's home, you know where we are, 80 installations plus the organic industrial base around the world. I think what's important to talk about is what we do and how we do it. And General Hamilton touched on this. As you look across all three military departments, all the uniformed services, the Army is unique because the Army is truly a command-centric, a people-first institution and service. Every installation is commanded by a senior commander, in almost every case a general officer, like Jim Eisenhower, command in Fort Bliss, directed by the Secretary of the Army. They command the place. Our job, whether it's Army Materiel Command, Installation Management Command, our 5 directorates who are represented here in the audience today that support the Army 4-star commands, or those 80 garrison commanders that are out there around the world, is to support those senior commanders, to bring our people, our resources, our expertise in the science of installation management to accomplish their priorities. But that is unique across the board. But our success is driven by, have we met the priorities for the senior commander? Have we done the things that they want to do to provide that common home, the common experience across the Army, but tailor it locally? Fort Bliss is different than Fort Liberty. Fort Liberty is different than Fort Carson. Every family should know that when they get there, they can go to the housing office, they can go to Army Community Services, they can go to CYS, but tailored in a way to support the needs of the senior commander. So Jim, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, sir. I'm going to use the same kind of format and start off by talking what Fort Bliss is for. None of this will be a surprise to you if you look at the first 4 bullets up there, but these are kind of the different mission sets that Fort Bliss units pursue. Not all of them work for me, but that this is what Fort Bliss provides to our Army, and in some cases, the interagency, if you talk about JTF North, as they support federal agency efforts along the southwest border. The bullet about educating enlisted leaders is also unique to Fort Bliss too, because we've got NICLCO, which is Non-Commissioned Officer Leadership Center of Excellence. Many of you know it as the Sergeant's Major Academy, in addition to the more traditional TRADOC or FORSCOM roles that units might have. That comprises our mission, but none of that happens without the bullets that are intentionally spaced a little bit lower beneath them to differentiate there. And you can see that some of the themes that General Jones has already brought up. But we have to provide soldier and family services, and we're always going to work to manage infrastructure and provide those base operations that sustains or enables our ability to pursue the combat-ready formations that General Hamilton spoke of. Just to give you context, because I hope we transition to some Q&A and have some dialogue, it'll help you understand where I come from when I respond to your questions. Fort Bliss is different. General Jones mentioned this, which is why tailorability is so important to a senior mission commander. But I'll just give you some of the characteristics you can see up on the left in the corner there. The black boundary is our Fort Bliss boundary. We can fit both of the CONUS CTCs inside it, so Fort Johnson and Fort Irwin at NTC, in addition to Fort Riley, in addition to Fort Cavazos. And in fact, the pink outline is kind of hard to see, but that's Rhode Island. So Fort Bliss is huge. That gives us all sorts of opportunity to train and pursue what are very different missions. And in fact, we're satisfying requirements at Fort Bliss for all 4 ACOMs, Army commands. So FORSCOM, TRADOC, AMC, and AFC are all represented and pursuing missions, which makes it a great privilege, and sometimes a good opportunity to complement each other as we pursue this. Let me get more specific about who is at Fort Bliss and show you. These are all the commands, and I'm just going to go from left to right, top to bottom, but you can see the general officer commands on the top with Rich Harrison commanding the 32nd AAMDC, or Army Air and Missile Defense Command. It's the largest of its kind in the world. Their soldiers are deployed routinely into different parts of the world, given the protection mission that they've got. Joint Modernization Command, right now commanded by Colonel Zach Miller, but this is a subordinate of Army Futures Command and the lead for capstone and convergence exercise planning and execution. It is a critical player in our Army's modernization efforts as we continue to iterate and develop to get better, faster, and maintain our readiness. 1st Armored Division, the primary force comm unit there, that's what I command in addition to Fort Bliss. Joint Task Force North, it's a Compo 1, 2, and 3 organization commanded by Major General Matt Smith, and they work with interagency partners to support Southwest border efforts. And then lastly, I mentioned the Non-Commissioned Officer Leadership Center of Excellence. Sergeant Major Tammy Everett, as there is one of the few non-commissioned officers who's a commandant, and she runs that organization. 11 brigades. We've got 154 companies, troops, or batteries. So the last thing I'll tell you is that Fort Bliss is the 2nd largest installation in our Army in terms of population and also in terms of land. So I often will have to tell people that, you know, we can't compare apples to oranges. If you ask why does Fort Riley get 3 boxes of that and Fort Bliss needs 10? But it gives you an idea of the size and the scope at Fort Bliss. But let's talk more about what my specific role as a senior mission commander is. So you can see these here, and I'm going to talk about that. There's a balance between unit readiness and then how we care for populations that are most important to us: soldiers, DA civilians, and family members. It's not binary, but this is something it changes, it's dynamic, and it just simply depends on the day and the mission set we're facing at the time. And so as a senior mission commander, I've got to separate myself from being the 1st Armored Division commander and realize that on the Secretary's behalf, I am a steward of Army funding, making sure I'm executing her priorities and those of the Chief and Army senior leaders as a senior mission commander, given the myriad mission sets we have there. And we also establish priorities specific to our installation because, as one thing General Jones has mentioned, every installation is different. And so while the priorities might be different in an area with a different climatology, our priorities are necessarily going to be focused on different things. I have to react to windstorms, perhaps more than some other installations, and I'm worried about HVACs in the summer. That's not a problem for Fort Wainwright, but as a senior mission commander, that gives me the ability to make sure that we are taking those funds, using them against published priorities for Army senior leaders, and then providing the care and the sustenance that ultimately contributes to the readiness of our entire formation. I've got 2 staffs that allow me to do that. That's kind of nice. I've got a division staff that's extremely capable, but then I've also got the garrison staff, and you've heard the garrison commanders mention the critical role that they play. In fact, the former garrison commander from Fort Bliss is sitting right here on the front row, Jim Brady, and he'll raise his hand when I say anything that's untruthful and hold me to standard here. But the garrison commander also has an incredibly capable staff that frankly is the continuity, comprised primarily of DA civilians, and they can give us the broader historical context that allows senior mission commanders to make the best decisions. We've also got a representational role, and that's really important to us in El Paso and Las Cruces and the environment in West Texas and southern New Mexico. So I spent a lot of time building that capability. We'll talk more about it maybe in Q&A, but building relationships with different community demographics, knowing that we will rely on them in times of crisis, if we ever have to deploy as a unit, and that they will fall in on many of the roles that our Army uniformed members play as a matter of course during the regular week if we've got to all move forward. Fort Bliss is different, but there's a lot of similarities to every installation I've ever grown up in, and that's one thing that General Jones mentioned, and I think that's one thing that Cheryl will hit on here. So, sweetheart, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. So as you heard already, MCOM's motto is, "We are the Army's home." But as a military spouse, and was also mentioned, home is where the Army sends you. We don't always know. We set our heart on one destination. We think, we get this list, we look through, and we start to prioritize. And then the Army comes back and says, "Oh no, how about this?" And we look at our spouse and say, I didn't even know Army people were in that location. And now what do we do? But what we do with that is we know that, for example, we came from JBLM to Fort Bliss. That can't be much more different. You go from rainy, green, cool, wet, snow-covered mountains to the Sun City. I was thrilled, actually, because I was ready for some sun. And in the desert. So the geography is totally different. But what's important for military families is that geography may change, but those services and the facilities, they really don't. They're tailored to that particular installation, but you know that when you show up and you're not sure about what school your child's going to attend, for example, we have at Bliss 10 different school systems. That's 10 different superintendents and school pyramids that Fort Bliss military children attend. There's a school liaison office there that's going to assist. And you can go in there and they can give you the information about how to register your child or which program might be the best. So you're trying to figure out where you can go and which side of the mountain you should live on. If you're a single soldier and you've got the BOSS program, again, other installations at Fort Carson, they may take you on ski trips. At JBLM, they may take you kayaking. At Fort Bliss, they're going to take you to Waco Tanks where you can rock climb and boulder, or you can go out and mountain bike. You're not sure your kid fell in love with soccer at one place or maybe even hockey. It might be in a little bit of problem at some installations, but you know there's Skies Unlimited. You know there's CYS services. You know there are those programs available to you that help you hit the ground running and feel at home so much faster. Because we know as military spouses, life is unpredictable. The reality is life is unpredictable for civilians as well. It doesn't matter where you are or what you do. But what I love about this structure with IMCOM is it gives you a little bit more predictability, so when you show up, you feel at home, even though you haven't figured out how to get to the commissary yet, you know there's one somewhere. And so I think that really helps for our military families. And here on this slide, you can see some of those programs that, again, they vary from installation to installation, but they're the fundamental heart of what the military offers or the Army offers to our families to give them the tools that they need and the opportunities that they want to have the best quality of life.
Thank you all so much. I just want to tell the audience that there are microphones in the middle of the aisles there. So as you're thinking about your questions, go ahead and line up and, don't be shy. This is your opportunity to ask that burning question that you've always wanted to ask. But I'm going to go ahead and start with some of my burning questions, if you will. So General Jones, again, income is such an integral part of taking care of people. What are the key focus areas to support Army quality of life from your perspective?
Well, who's been at the family forums this week? At least one of them, probably almost everybody, probably with the chief and the secretary and the SMA earlier this afternoon. But as you've heard the Army leadership talk about, really 5 focus areas. And coincidentally or not, as you saw at the end in terms of the prioritization that the audience had in the senior leader town hall. But for IMCOM in particular, it is housing, both unaccompanied housing, barracks, as well as family housing. It is childcare, it is spouse employment, and then it's improving the PCS process. But that one, and it ties to that first one you saw in the town hall at the senior leaders, is healthcare. We don't do healthcare, but what the garrison commanders, what Jim Brady did for General Eisenhower as his garrison commander, is a critical integration role, is to integrate all of those teammates on an installation that provides services, both to support the units, but also support the soldiers and families, is to integrate that together. That way, commanders like Jim can look at a commander like Jim and say, this is what I want to accomplish, and you have one colonel commander to integrate all that, bring that together. So it really is those 5 focus areas to make sure that we do support quality of life for soldiers and families, and then through that to support readiness. But Patty, if I can, do you mind if I ask Jim Brady to talk that integration piece?
Please do.
And then we can probably go to Jim Eisenhower to follow up in terms of how that works from the senior commander perspective.
Is this mic on? Sir, thank you. Again, I'm Colonel Jim Brady, former Fort Bliss Garrison Commander. Now I'm serving at Headquarters IMCOM. And my tour of duty was from July 2021 through 2023. A lot happened at Fort Bliss, and there was a lot of integration of services. But I'd like to front load that with my own background. I'm an infantry officer by trade. I've watched IMCOM operate, and there's a steep learning curve for what you're going to get into and do in terms of integrating services. The good thing is when you step into the role, you're empowered by IMCOM professionals who know their role. And the other thing that General Jones showed was Army Regulation 600-20. I know we talk about it. We say there's authorities in there, there's roles and responsibilities. But what's neat about this version of it is it itemizes the command of the installation for the senior commander and the garrison commander. So you got to know your role before you go and start to, go after the senior commander's priorities. And in there, it says a lot of the things that are in this brief. And as General Eisenhower was briefing, what Fort Bliss is for, those things of synchronizing and integrating services, that's a role that he has, and I support that. I provide the services, and I'm the senior integrator, the senior executive for installation activities. So how did I do that? Well, one, I was enabled by great leadership. And so the IMCOM CG is all about following the structure that's in the Army regulation, which is IMCOM, the chain of command, all the way down to the garrison, is there to enable the senior commander, and we are in direct support. So I have one chain of command, but I clearly understand my roles. Direct support. So the priorities of the senior commander, I pick those up, and I look at the services, and I make sure that, one, he understands that. So one thing up front is you have to have routine dialogue with your senior commander, and that's where the leadership of General Eisenhower comes in. He brings in his garrison commander and immediately involves me in all kinds of discussions with his own staff and one-on-one discussions. So I know his priorities, I know his standing priorities, and when his priorities shift, I'm working with either himself or his chief of staff or his deputy commanding generals to react to those changing priorities. So those routine dialogue touch points are highly important so that you can, one, understand where the senior commander is going, and then it allows me to give feedback on where things are. So the next part about delivering and integrating services is that I got to organize the effort, right? So one, the organization of the garrisons, although not every garrison is the same. If you visit, we say this in IMCOM, if you visit one installation, you've only visited one. There is a standard structure, but it's tailored to the installation. So we are organized right up front with our 5 directorates, Directorate of Human Resources, Public Works, Plans, Training, Mobilization Security, MWR, and DES, Emergency Services, and we have our support offices. So that structure there is built in to provide the services. Again, those IMCOM professionals help enable the right service at the right time. What you may not know is that and General Jones will talk about this, is the Secretariat or the DA staff, the Army level, sets the requirements for an installation, sets the resourcing, and then at the tactical level, we're communicating the risk of where those are. So not all resources reach the required level, and so it's about communicating risk up, and then I work with a senior commander to understand his priorities for services and to adjust where I can to fulfill the needs of the installation. And so there's examples. We just talked about quality of life, and so within that, informing the community is one thing we have to do in terms of where we stand. And so an initiative that General Eisenhower brought up was the Community Information Exchange, the CIE. Other installations do this. And so I brought the idea initially to him, hey, sir, maybe every other month. He's like, no, every month I'm going to be there. We're going to resource it with making sure that the chains of command show up. And then it was a great forum to, one, dialogue with the installation, the tenant units or the mission partners, and then the community members about where we stood with priorities and how we were getting after it. Also allowed us for feedback. So, sir, I hope I didn't answer that question too long, but...
No, I think you nailed it. Jim, anything there?
That's right. Patty asked about the integration piece. I'll just hit really quickly. Jim kind of described it, but I see it 2 ways. There's the vertical integration with the existing chain of command and authorities driven by R600-20. So my garrison commander is one of them. I treat him like a brigade commander. And so in brigade commander only meetings with the 1st Armored Division, garrison commander is always there. He has a parking spot in front of the headquarters. Other brigade commanders don't have that. So I need that honest feedback, because I can look at Jim. He's a CSL Select 06. He knows what he's doing, and he'll make the best decision and just say, here's what I'm thinking. Tell me if I'm off, and I'll get that reliable feedback, because he's got the analytical and experiential base of his staff to provide that good input. Likewise, though, I also am interested in Army spouses are the senior best source of truth, I think, on the installation. And so that's why the CIE was so important to us, is that it's an information flow from top down. We want them to know what's going on in the installation. But what's really important is we're starting to turn it into a problem-solving venue where we can get honest feedback from senior advisors, SFRG leaders, and any Army spouse that wants to attend, and allows us to hone in or identify trends that we need to address that we might not have caught through just normal operations.
Thank you so much. And I want to kind of like pick up on that if I could and ask Mrs. Eisenhower a quick question, because I do think that taking care of people means communicating with people.
Absolutely.
Clear communication exchanges, which is, and I love the model that you've just presented. It's fantastic. But Mrs. Eisenhower, getting information to the stakeholders, getting information to military spouses, especially our junior military spouses, in an area as large as Fort Bliss has to be a challenge. And are there any tips or, I guess, tactics that you use to get the information out?
Yeah, if anyone solved this problem, please let me know, because you're right. That is something that you're constantly working through that. And I think about, in this case, it helps not just to be a military spouse, but to be a military mom, because I think about how I communicate with my own children who are now in the military and the information sources that they use and how that generates questions and ideas from them. We put it out as far and as wide as we can. We are still working on some of the old traditional ways, good old rosters, which are also tricky, but what we've learned too is you trust your neighbor, you trust your peer, you trust your friend. And so we have to get those influencers out there at all those different levels. And so I try to talk about pushing the information down and in through the unit so that it doesn't just stay up at one level and then no one ever finds out, but we keep pushing it down. You run the risk sometimes of playing telephone. Right? The more you iterate and push it down, then it starts to tweak a little bit here and there. But there are ways now we send out text messages or the fact that it's in print and it's not actually over the telephone does keep that clarity and truth to the message. But I think this unveiling of the new app is going to be fantastic. Because again, we all know that as soon as you get those orders or you think you're going to get orders or you're not sure it could be these 5 different places, you start the mad research. You start looking at all the housing markets, you look at the schools, you look at the sports, you look at the scout troops, the churches, and having that app that's going to have real-time information. I love the idea that you can see the gate traffic because you may have fallen in love with a house on one side of the installation and you realize quality of life, maybe I don't want to live over there. I think that will really help, but we're constantly looking for those ways, and with that community information exchange, that was one reason why it's named different things at other installations. Other installations have this going on as well, but we were trying to bring it so that the community knows it's for them. It's not, in the past, sometimes they were called senior leader updates, or there was something in there with spouse, and we were afraid that people felt like that didn't include them. We want to know that the entire community is included and they can give their feedback. We had a spouse who gave feedback on an upcoming traffic change, and she kept kind of beating it each month. And then she finally showed up with a piece of paper and said, can we not route the traffic this way? And DPW went back and took a look at it, and they changed it. And so I keep teasing her that I'm going to call that, that intersection, I'm going to name it after her every time I make that right turn that they were going to say you can't do anymore. And that's the power of those military families. They live and work and do that every day, and they can give us good insight.
Patty, can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So if you've attended really anything for the past 3 days, you have seen the passion from the Army senior leaders about exactly what Cheryl just described, about single source of reliable, accurate, current information, but delivered through multiple means, to meet our soldiers and our families and Army civilians and Soldiers for Life where they are. What you will see in the coming, really, days and weeks, but absolutely through this year, is the development of tools, which is part of IMCOM's job, Army Materiel Command's job to support senior commanders, is develop tools that they can use at the local level, they can tailor at the local level to meet that information need. maybe it is meetings, maybe it's flyers, maybe it is digital signs on the installation, and first and foremost, the app that our Chief of Staff has talked about, developed by soldiers, for soldiers and families, by Army Futures Command, their software factory, to be able to meet that need. Well, we will provide that tool, but as Team Bliss gets that and they say, we wanted to do a little bit of this, a little less of that, to meet the needs of Community Bliss, they can do that. But those are the things that IMCOM does in support of senior commanders. So I won't ask you to raise your hand. I'm hoping everybody hit the QR code, gave us feedback on the new app. If you don't or haven't yet, the team will pass out flyers. It will take you all of about 2.5 minutes. You can hit the QR code right there with your phone. You can see a video on the app. You can actually interact with it downstairs at the booth in the installation assembly area. But give us feedback. Again, soldier developed based on soldier feedback to support soldiers and families and Army civilians, to really provide one more tool to support senior commanders as they communicate with their communities.
Thank you. Absolutely. And General Eisenhower, you had me at 9 minutes, just so you know. But I think
you want me to go on? I've got other stats.
Yes, I actually do want you to kind of elaborate a little bit on some of the best practices that that Fort Bliss utilizes in order to make the quality of life for their families a bit better. And then I'm going to ask General Jones a question: is how do you get those best practices and kind of spread them out among the entire Army?
Yeah, thanks, Patty. I'm going to probably take this in a little different way, and you can bring me back if you'd like to. The first is that the best practices we identify are from simply soliciting input. I'm part of the problem. I'm old and gray-haired, and I will think I've got a good idea, but the value from younger people and their ability to resolve issues quickly with the right recommendations is really helpful. So we've got to create those mediums, and it's in the formal chain of command, but it's also in the spouse chain of information, and it's also through some of the feedback we've got. So we've got mechanisms like a CG hotline. A CG hotline is a little bit redundant, but the reality is it helps me avoid IG complaints and congressionals because it gives soldiers and family members a way to send a complaint in. I don't think they all realize it comes into my inbox. So sometimes when they're frustrated, they don't realize they're talking to me. But that's a really quick way to realize, hey, we've got a problem at this intersection, or you know what, I forgot to ask about the aquatic center, and how long is it going? We just need to get the information out. So that input from the lower level helps us. I don't get enough of it because we continually try to solicit that. I think some folks just don't have the confidence that it would happen, and so part and parcel of that is our subsequent obligation to make sure that we inform folks that we've addressed it and give them the confidence that those kind of mechanisms work, and we need their feedback to increase the quality of life across every aspect of what goes on to care for families and soldiers and DA civilians, and most importantly, or equally importantly, get us most prepared to deploy combat-ready formations. But there's another aspect here specific to Fort Bliss I want to address, and that's uninformed narratives, because I think that's still a part of quality of life. There was I wrote an op-ed with the mayor of El Paso and the county judge executive. Both of them are really important players in the civic community in El Paso, to try to address what we kind of sensed before we came to Fort Bliss. And it's this notion that it's in the middle of the desert, there's nothing to do, and it's dangerous. And the reality is the empirical data state quite otherwise, but it's common. We were just recruiting CGSC majors up at Fort Leavenworth, and I had some young, energetic majors walking around the hallways during breaks, handing out QR codes and saying, hey, are you interested in Fort Bliss? And a few of them would say, oh, no way. And they just ask them, why not? And it's that same narrative. So we've initiated a campaign called It's Better at Bliss to specifically address this. I'm not going to address all the claims, and there's always going to be someone that's upset. And not everything at Bliss is perfect. But we think there's so much there that doesn't get fair credit that we've launched a deliberate campaign and sustain that through our public affairs office at the garrison, but also at the division, to make sure that we just simply remind people there are alternative perspectives. Take a look at it. Talk to someone who's there. We were at a retirement ceremony a couple months ago, 15 families retiring, 13 stayed in El Paso. We were at a retirement ceremony just last month, only 5 families retiring, 4 stayed in El Paso. And so I think that contributes to quality of life, because if folks have their mind influenced unfairly or through an uninformed opinion beforehand, it just puts them in a hole, and I think it makes it harder to convince them that, hey, there's a lot of opportunity here and let's take advantage while we're there, because it's a neat, like every installation, there's plenty to do and plenty to enjoy. You just have to embrace it.
So best practices? So I may be a slow learner, but I try to remember things when I learn them. So in the summer of 1988, or 1998, I learned 3 things from a battalion commander, among many, many things. First, team, together each achieves more. 2, the value of relationships. And 3, the value of collaboration. We embrace all 3 of those across the 60,000 IMCOM professionals around the world, across the 80 installations, and we look for venues and forums to reinforce the value of that. And it's both sharing the best practices. An easy one is we bring all the garrison leaders, our directorate leaders, our senior executive civilians that lead the garrisons around the world in support of senior commanders, bring them to San Antonio once a year, and we spend a good bit of that time just highlighting best practices. But that's only one, in person. Monthly, Sergeant Major Copeland, our command sergeant major, and I are talking to the garrison commanders, and we're talking leader development, but we're getting them to talk to each other as well. And all 5 ID directors, those senior executive civilians, encourage that. But it's as important as it is to share the best practices, it's also to ask those questions. Yeah. My senior commander wants this, but I'm not quite sure how to do that. But they have 79 peers, and they have all of those IMCOM professionals have been doing this for decades to say, we've seen something sort of like that before. Here's some things you might want to think about. So you get the value of the entire IMCOM enterprise, really the AMC enterprise, all the way up to headquarters of the Department of the Army, back to that garrison commander to help him or her be successful to support that senior commander. But it is teamwork, it is collaboration, and investing in those relationships.
I think that battalion commander that you spoke to was very wise.
Yeah.
But what
I remember who he was.
Handsome too.
But I do want to say that that's something that I'm learning as well in my role, and that is, when we create a policy, we have to make sure that the services are also committed and think that that policy is a good one and that they can implement. And it is all those 3 things that you just mentioned: collaboration, teamwork, and communication, which is incredibly important, which kind of leads me to this next question about community.
We didn't tee that up either.
We did. We are so good. Especially for here at AUSA, the working with the local communities, working with our chapters is incredibly important. But I would imagine that at the installation level, Sir, for you and Colonel Brady, for you, just how do you connect with that local community so that they also are supporting the majority of families that are living off the installation with the resources that they have?
Well, Patty, I appreciate you asking me that. One of the first things I did when I arrived at Fort Bliss, having not lived there before, was ask Jim and his team to walk me through the power projection platform capabilities of Fort Bliss and where we might have capability shortfall. And we ran a tabletop exercise, or a TTX, based off of a regular time-phased force deployment flow to identify those. That gave us insight into it, but our Army's transition to focus on large-scale combat operations and necessarily then large-scale mobilization operations is of keen interest to me at Fort Bliss. We've got the Army's largest MFGI, Mobilization Force Generation installation, run by 1st Army and particularly the 5th Armored Brigade. And that's a really important capability, but that creates a predicament for me, because if the 32nd Double AMDC and the 1st Armored Division have to move out quickly, we have competing requirements because in come a lot of Compo 2 and 3 that have to come to Fort Bliss. So we're competing for max on the ground limits on the airfields. We're competing for railheads and rail spurs and download ramps and things of that sort. So that's particularly important. And that forced us into the community to find out where's redundant railheads. If we're in a time of national mobilization, these things get easier. What's the MOG, the max on the ground for aircraft at El Paso International, which is right across the street, and how do we use those assets? Another thing we do, there's 2 other things we've done with the community in particular, is I ask brigade commanders to go out and simply ask, what are you frustrated with Fort Bliss? And we get some good feedback. Usually folks are just surprised that we've even asked that, but we tell them that our relationship with you is really important because we're going to rely on you, which leads me to my last point, and that's one of the things we recognized during our tabletop exercise about a large-scale mobilization operations is the dearth of uniformed expertise that still influences families and DA civilians every day if we deploy. And so there are key demographics we wanted to engage, anticipating specific problems. I've got a conference, we do it twice a year, with local religious leaders, but we have 69 participants from 59 different communities, religious communities in and around El Paso. I can't make them do anything. But we bring them in and we buy them breakfast twice a year. We tell them what the unit's doing, but I have been very frank with them and said, if these units deploy, our families are already in your communities, they're volunteering in your churches, I will hope that you provide pastoral care because the chaplains are coming with us. There'll be a few we leave back, but just the mass, there's more than 60,000 family members and 11,800 DA civilians. I'm going to need help. I have a media roundtable with the media at least twice a year. I want them to know who the commanders are and trust us because we're going to rely on them for to counter disinformation. We rearranged we call it Partners in Education, but the structure where we partner units with the 10 different school districts that Cheryl mentioned, that also provides us many mouthpieces of authority through which we can pass out information to families. They've got their own networks in addition to the students and our kids who are going to their schools. And then the last thing is that we develop relationships with the traditional civic structure because it's really important that those folks understand it. And I'm very clear with them. I said, I'm going to need your help. I don't know when, I don't know what the issue is, but I'm going to need your help. And I want to be standing beside you, and I hope you're going to be standing beside me because if you've got an issue, I'm going to pick up the phone and call and ask what I can do for help. And usually their professional obligation is that you just tell me what you need. And I think those relationships that Joan Jones was talking about, that Lieutenant Colonel Brown was teaching all of us back in 1999, are absolutely critical. You can't build them under duress. You've got to build them beforehand.
I'm going to add one specific point, if I can. So, Dasty Barron talked about, all of the soldiers and families live off the installation. It's 70%. 30% live on, 70% live off. But sometimes what soldiers and families don't know is that the Housing Service Office, part of the garrison, in support of the senior commander, is there to help you off the installation as well. So I don't know how many folks actually read their orders. I'm not sure I've really actually read mine many times throughout my career, but there's always that line in there that your first stop will be the Housing Service Office, the HSO. For the soldiers and families that are here in the room, please do that because they will help you if you need to, if you want to stay off the installation while you're waiting for housing. They have rental partnership agreements with rental areas off the installation. They can advise you if you want to go buy a home or anything in between. But if you decide it's better for your family to live off the installation, that Housing Service Office is still there to help you. And then if you have a problem with housing on or off the installation, go to the Housing Service Office, and they will help you with that as well, whether it is Army-owned housing in the different places in the world where we have that, privatized housing, or again, rental or owned off the installation. Know that HSO is there. It is part of the garrison and is all part of the team that support the senior commander, particularly as they're working with that community.
Thank you. We have a gentleman here in this row that's going to ask a question and break the ice for the rest of the audience who will also ask questions.
Patty, thank you very much for facilitating this panel. I think this is outstanding. My name is Rodney Pennywell. I'm from Huntsville, Alabama. I separated from the Army when I was a captain in the mid-'90s and things like that, but I was a dependent. And just like you've been through 22 different moves and things like that. So I'm delighted to be here at AUSA, delighted to see the new logo, delighted to hear General Hamilton speak about, readiness and the installation. So I'm listening. One of the things that from a long time to now, and I think Secretary Wormuth kind of brought this out in opening ceremonies, where she said there was about $6.5 billion worth of deferred maintenance on our installations. And from a young child to now, I've always heard stories that related to the Army treats its soldiers' families less than that of the other services, particularly the Air Force. Mm-hmm. So when we would travel from one side of the country to the other side of the country, we would look over our triptychs and we would say, where's the nearest Air Force facility? Not an Air Force. Where's the nearest Navy facility? Not a Navy. Okay, we'll find the Army facility, see if we can find the BOQ or something of that nature. And listening to what you've all talked about today, I think it's incredibly refreshing. I think a lot of people, I've also served on the board in the Huntsville area on still serving veterans. So not only are soldiers going in and out, but soldiers are transitioning back into the civilian life, pretty much next to Redstone Arsenal, mostly Army. But the interesting thing is, I think that a lot of our civilian population carries that stigma that says, if I'm in the Army, I'm going to the last choice. And listening to you, I know that can't be the case, but listening to Secretary Wormuth say, gee, we're going to do $1 billion worth of maintenance on our installation housing because we have $6.5 billion in backlog. Unfortunately, that's a negative thing for our soldiers. It's a challenge for Ms. Cheryl and all the things that you have to do. And how do we create and tell a better story?
Ronnie, phenomenal question. So if you mind if I
please.
hit a couple things, and I'll pass it over to both Jim and Cheryl for their perspective. So what you said was probably accurate 20 years ago. So I will tell you that once we were serving together at then Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, and I moved to the Boston area to go to graduate school, Hanscom Air Force Base. So there's about 5 or 6 Army families that live in there. All of us were Army captains, and all of us were ecstatic. Best houses we'd ever lived in, living on the Air Force Base. All our Air Force neighbors were looking at us and said, what is wrong with you all? But it was true. But I think the Army over the past 20 years, housing privatization, the continued reinforcement that the Army is people, and the priority, quality of life, is readiness. Where we are today, and we still got plenty of roads to go, and you've heard the senior leaders talk about that, but where we are today, providing that quality of life. Housing, unaccompanied housing, also known as barracks, but unaccompanied housing as well, really is tremendous in terms of the investments in quality of life for Army families. I'll hit barracks a little bit, then I'm going to come back to your question about communication. The Secretary has talked a good bit about, as has the Chief, about that deficit, and Sergeant Weimer's talked about it as well. But the commitment from the Secretary for investment year after year of over $1 billion, approximately $1.2 billion, to both restore, modernize what we have, to build new. 100% sustainment, so if there's a problem in the barracks, that is going to get taken care of. Preventative maintenance, all those things you do to take care of the barracks, that same investment for our single soldiers living in barracks that we do for our families and going forward. And then the other piece of that is what's known as the Army Barracks Management Program, which lays out the roles for all of us, from the Army Secretariat down to the squad leader and everybody in between, how we invest and we take care of the barracks to make sure safe, secure, right quality for the soldiers. But you asked about communication. And particularly for all the folks that dress like General Eisenhower and I am a deep believer that it is our job to connect to the American public. It is our job to represent the American Army, connect to the American public, and tell our story. All of us, particularly the soldiers in the room, are the most effective spokesmen and women the Army has. Tell your Army story. Why did you join? Why did you stay in? Most Americans don't know a soldier. And most have perceptions that are based on movies, TVs, et cetera, TV shows, et cetera. But to tell them what it's really like, the good and the bad of being a soldier. What is your Army life about? It comes best from soldiers. And it is our job, America's Army's job, to connect the American people and to tell that story. Jim, thoughts on that from Bliss?
I was going to jump in if I may. Sure. Absolutely. That's what I keyed into. Is it Rodney? At the end was we don't do a great job of telling our story. Yep. And that's what we need to do, but we also need to do that as military families. And one thing that hasn't come up, but spouse employment. When we are out engaged in the community and employed in the community, then we become those ambassadors. And our coworkers have the opportunity to say, well, what is it like? And you can invite them onto the installation, like, come on over to my house, see what it's like. Let me tell you, it may seem like a crazy life to you that we keep moving all the time, but then as I talk to my coworkers, they're a little bit jealous because they haven't been to all these different places. And sometimes, frankly, they haven't even been to the places in their own backyards because, as you all know, as a military family, you go to a new place and you research all the cool things to do. I'm going to do this hike. I'm going to go to this museum. I want to check out this restaurant. And the next thing you know, the person in the cubicle or the desk beside you has lived there for 20 years and they've never made it out to the mission trail, or they haven't done these things. So as more and more spouses, and that is something we need to continue to work on, but get out into the community and work in the community, and the community recognizes that, okay, you're going to take a chance on me. Maybe I'm only going to be here for 2 years, but you're going to get a really hardworking spouse for 2 years. And then that spouse is able to say, this life is pretty good. Maybe your kid who's not really sure what they want to do, not sure if they want to go to college yet, they should jump in and join the Army. And the fact that I have my own kids in the military as well tells them, I know the pluses and I know some of the detractions, but I'm still willing to support them in their journey.
Ronette, you got a great question, and this is where I will tie into what both Cheryl and General Jones said, and it's about communication. You know, one of the first things we ever learn is we owe soldiers two things: task and purpose, and the purpose is the why. And especially with those folks living on Fort Bliss, I owe them the why. And so I probably fail more times than I succeed, but when I get a specific recommendation or a specific request, we staff it, we analyze it, we try to make the best decision. I'll call them and explain my rationale, or I'll use a venue like the Community Information Exchange. And in my experience, nobody's thrown anything at me yet, but my experience is that if you simply explain the why, then I think they're far more, it builds trust, and they're far more likely to trust you in the future to know that you're making the right decisions. We just went through the facilities investment plan process. It takes months of analysis down at the level of execution at garrisons, and it's fed all the way back up into decision makers, up into the Pentagon for the Secretary and the Chief to make as it comes through the Secretariat and the R staff. And it's a really terrific process. There's bureaucracy isn't always a pejorative word. It makes sure that we make the right decisions. And if I share kind of how much effort and analysis we've put into these things, in my experience, then soldiers and family member alike will come back and acknowledge that I got you, understand, and I think they're less likely to complain and make a claim like the grass is always greener on the other side.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Rancher. First of all, I love the discussion. And I'm partial to Fort Bliss because I was the 1st Division Headquarters Battalion Commander. So I got to say...
You say that again, everybody? I'm just kidding you.
So I got to say, General Eisenhower, I love to hear you say how you're partnering with the community. Yeah. I hated to leave it. Matter of fact, my house is still there anytime I want to go back. But one of the things, I'm a retired colonel. One of the last roles I served in was as the Inspector General. Mm-hmm. And it was when, I don't know how, asbestos, mold, it seems to be an albatross around the Army's neck. You know, every 3 or 5 years it comes back. And I have a son that serves now. So I've seen in contingency environments and even in garrison environments when we have private housing or it's under management of a company, we as green suiters or leaders, we abdicate, or somehow there's a disconnect where we're trusting a private company to manage our housing. And then we discover that there's families, and like you said, when it's a young family, young soldier, young wife, spouse, they don't necessarily know how to address those deficiencies. So my question is, how do we address avoiding having history repeat itself, and we as Army leaders avoid abdicating what is our responsibility to make sure that the soldiers and their families have adequate, if anything, outstanding housing? Because General Hamilton alluded to the fact that we're engaging in modernization of the housing, but there are some areas that are still dilapidated and we're patching it up. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, how we avoid being on Army Times, mold, asbestos, and so forth.
I think the Army Times is out there too, Karen, by the way, because we're meeting with them here shortly afterwards. But Karen, thank you. And I'll tell you, but it starts with what I would say is first principles. And I will provide a little more detail, but if you start with the Army is people and the Army is command-centric, if you start with those two things, everything else kind of flows naturally from there. So, you know, and we won't say which installation, but I remember being shown a house in the summer of 2021. Before privatization. And I walked in there I now have 3 sons, we had 2 sons at the time. I turned around and walked out. I said, I cannot ask my family to live in this house. And, you know, we scraped together, we rented a place nearby, and, you know, but I was not going to live in that house. 2 years later, I moved to another installation, again, before privatization, and the garrison gave me the keys and said, here's your house, and you really can't make this up. They said, this house is condemned. We're going to demolish this house next year. Don't put any work orders in because we're not going to respond unless it's an emergency, before privatization. Fortunately, privatization put that in the rearview mirror. But 100,000 homes across the Army. As General Hamilton said, 86 privatized, 14,000 Army-owned, mostly overseas. If any one family out of that 100,000 that live in homes is living in unsatisfactory, unsafe, not the right quality, we've got more work to do. But back to the first principles, that's our job. Our job is oversight. So those housing companies, they own the houses, they manage the houses, but no soldier, no Army family should ever feel unheard. Their first step should be the relationship they have with the housing company. But if they're not getting resolution, one, chain of command's part of that. Every soldier has a sergeant, so making sure back to the command centric, making sure that the chain of command is involved, but also the garrison's involved. Because I have found that when the housing company's there, the chain of command is there, the garrison's there, we can make sure that soldier and that family is taken care of. Probably more process than you care to hear, but just like General Eisenhower said, bureaucracy is not always a pejorative word. Every single Monday, I spend usually an hour to 2 or 3, depending on which company, and the first thing we do is we talk every single displaced family in the Army. We average 30 out of 100,000 on any given week, 15 pre-planned maintenance, the other 15 pipes burst and those kind of things. But we go name by name to make sure those 30 families are taken care of at my level, across the entire Army. It is that important. And then we meet with one housing company, and we go through garrison commander and that housing company, and we talk through all of the statistics in terms of, are we making sure those houses are being taken care of at the right quality for everyone that lives there. And we go through every installation with that partner. The next Monday, another partner. We have 6 housing companies we work with. We do that 6 weeks in a row. Then we do with the Army-owned housing. Then I meet with every CEO. We bring the Army headquarters, Army Materiel Command, to meet with at the corporate level, and we do it all again every single week to make sure that what garrison commanders are doing every day, we're doing at the command and at the Army level as well, because taking care of soldiers and command-centric. When we get those 2 things and we do that right, we avoid those things you talked about a family or soldier not living in a safe condition. And the message for the audience, particularly the audience that is out there, no soldier or family should ever feel unheard. If you are in a housing situation that is not appropriate, not safe, not clean, not the right quality, tell your soldiers' chain of command, tell your garrison, tell me, tell all the folks that work in IMCOM, tell the chain of command like General Eisenhower at Fort Bliss, because that is our commitment to you for quality of life, again, to take care of Army people, because the Army is people. But Jim, any thoughts on housing?
You're going to see how that plays out at the installation level then, because I see it the exact same way. I'll give you just kind of 2 phrases that I think best answer your question. The first is taking care of soldier problems. And I repeat this more on Fort Bliss in every venue I have with soldiers and subordinate leaders than any other phrase. Our job is to solve their problems. I can't get them in the fight. They won't be combat ready if I haven't solved their problems. And so it is a renewed emphasis, at least at Fort Bliss, to understand that that's part of our role. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. I find out about it through things like the CG hotline. And then the chain of command stands in front of me that very day, because some problems cannot wait. But that's what we do. And then we also use that as an example with others to remind them that, hey, if you're an E7 and your corporal tells you he can't get a work order to fix a simple hole in his fence done, and it's been submitted for 3 months, that E7's job is to put him in a POV, drive down to the housing office, and stay there until it's resolved. And there's the power of a first sergeant calling and saying, this is First Sergeant Eisenhower for Alpha 167. I want to talk about the work order for Corporal Jones's fence. The housing reacts to that. They're not perfect. I have had plenty of opportunity to engage personally to make sure we get it fixed quickly. There's a second aspect to that. So it's taking care of soldier problems, but to me it's just good leadership. I do use this in the pejorative term, and it's adulting. But a lot of times we just need to teach young soldiers and young family members what is appropriate and what is part of their obligation and basic responsibility as an adult. I've got it good at Fort Hood compared to Fort Stewart or Fort Liberty, where mold really isn't a problem for us. And I will tell senior leaders, I don't have a mold problem, I have a discipline problem. Because just the lack of humidity, we're not under the same conditions. We have had some mold problems, but that's from leaky pipes we didn't discover until it was too late, and there's a quick way to fix it, it's acute. But at the end of the day, we still have young men and women who will call a hotline and say, I have black mold in my shower, and it's on the grout. It's because they haven't cleaned it. And so that's where, again, leaders come in to solve problems, but I think that's how we keep out of the Army Times, if you want to put it that way. Sometimes it's good news in the Army Times, but that's how we address those kinds of things, is to make sure that we know we have an obligation to solve those problems, and it's a full stop for quality of life, safety, and health, and finance. And then we use those opportunities to make sure we're coaching soldiers how to be responsible adults, because in many cases, they've either misdiagnosed the problem or they could solve the problem themselves.
And I'll jump in quickly. We all know the phrase, if you see something, say something. We think of that in the airport or somewhere else with a misplaced bag, but that goes to everything in life. So if a family, to General Jones's point, sees something in the house that isn't quite right, they need to say something. They need to act, reach out and do the maintenance, because that way it could be addressed before it becomes a huge issue. We once had, it's been years ago, but I looked in our bedroom and I thought, what is that shadow on the ceiling? That's weird. Did someone light a candle here? And there had been a crack in the pipe. That was something that, because I saw it and I could say something, it could be addressed quickly instead of mold growing over time. It was no one's fault. It was just, an odd coincidence that happened. But if I hadn't said something when I saw it, it could have snowballed into a bigger issue. So families, I hope, and soldiers feel comfortable saying something and telling their first sergeant, hey, I put this work order in and I'm not getting a response, so that that chain of command can go in and help.
Thank you so much. Sir, we're going to go ahead and take your question as the last question and answer it, and then I'll go to closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. It was going to be about dining facilities on posts. One of the things that I noticed in the Digital Garrison app is that the Digital Garrison app had no dining facility information, didn't have the locations, didn't have the times. In the new app that has been shown, you're linking to the schedules that are posted, for instance, on the Fort Cav Army.mil website. The problem that I have is that there is no regulatory requirement. There's nothing in food services or food service operation that requires a DFAC to post a schedule, either physically or online. We have seen this problem repeatedly, where schedules not only don't match reality, but the schedules are not posted. Soldiers can't find that information. They're not posted on the DFAC. They're not posted online. If you go look at the Fort Liberty information, it has a QR code. It has the Instagram link for the 18th Airborne Dining Facility. As of today, it hasn't been updated in 6 months. Sir, for Fort Bliss, if you go on the Facebook, they updated the DFAC schedule today, or for this month. Wasn't done the previous 6 months, and the Fort Bliss Army.mil website doesn't have a link to dining facilities or warrior restaurants. So I understand that we have an improved app that'll have the dining facility information, but how do we get a requirement that be kept updated regularly so that soldiers can be disseminated that information? And also, shout out to Army Times that's in the room covering this. Karen Jowers is laughing.
So a couple things. First, were you in the room when we briefed General George last Monday or last Thursday on the app? Because we highlighted, and being a little bit facetious there, but we highlighted a couple things. One, we showed him 5 demonstration apps, and the one that he focused on was the My Army Post app that you've seen up here and you've seen throughout AUSA. One, developed by soldiers for soldiers, I talked about, but it was also the nascent capabilities that we highlighted. One was the gates that you've heard the chief talk about in terms of traffic and those kind of things. The other was DFACs. And it was about hours, and it was, and the software factory team used that as an example to highlight soldier feedback. So if soldiers go and the hours that are on the app either don't match reality or don't match as posted on the door, right then and there, the soldier can put feedback in the app that goes back to make sure it is fixed. So it's feedback from any one of the users that are out there. And that really got the chief's attention to make sure that we are, again, responsive. And it gets back to that single source of reliable, accurate information delivered through multiple means. And that's why, one of many reasons why the chief has been passionate about us rolling out this app to address exactly the kind of things you're talking about. We looked at fitness center hours. You should be able to know before you leave your house, your car, your barracks room, whatever, what are the hours of the fitness center? What are the hours of the DFAC, to your point? And it should be there at your fingertips, accurate and reliable, because you know it is up to date. So that's why we're going the direction we're going. You absolutely highlighted one of those problems that we've got to solve across the board.
Sir, I understand the idea of having that feedback if it is wrong, but without it being a requirement, there's no force that requires that I called the CG hotline for Fort Cav to tell them that they hadn't updated their DFAC schedule in 6 months. The month after it was in the news, they still didn't update it for that month. So I understand that we talk about, barracks cleanliness and saying that soldiers just need to be adults and clean a little, but where's that same statement for commanders that can't be bothered to tape a piece of paper to the DFAC window?
I'd be careful saying that commanders can't be bothered, because that's not, any commander I know wouldn't have that attitude. So let me tell you what we've done at Fort Bliss. First of all, I'm in a DFAC if I'm not TDY. I'm in a DFAC every week, and I ask questions. The DFAC users at Fort Bliss don't use Facebook. We can find the occasional family member that might, so we still want it on there, and so I wrote it down. It will be action tonight. But that's the kind of feedback we need, right? And then .mil is used more by families, but what our soldiers have asked us to do is use a QR code and post it. If you go to Fort Bliss today at any DFAC, and I know this because we got on this just a few weeks ago, you'll find QR codes that are accurate and show the times. But here's a couple other things that we've made deliberate, because maybe it's not regulatory, but the Sergeant Major and I thought it was too important. DFACs will always have our attention. Is I'm not interested in mission command in a DFAC hour scenario, and we've told everybody associated with DFACs there are two people on the installation that can change hours: the division command sergeant major or the division commander or installation commander. So that's one of the things. They were making decisions they thought were logical based off of throughput or head count, and there's no malicious intent there, but it was wrong. We've got a hold of that now. But what we've also found is that they want these QR codes to be accurate, and so it gets sent to the division headquarters and the division sergeant major now every week to make sure that he's got visibility and he knows if there's any change or proposed change, because he's got to be the one to approve them. But your point about getting down to soldiers is what we've got to get to them where they are, and I think the best way to do it is, one of the things the chief has said recently, and I applaud him for it, is every installation is different. Just go down to those specific installations, ask the users, and that's where we'll get that feedback and then be able to react to it quickly.
Nope. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Some of the posts use Army.mil, so I appreciate that you have a solution.
I think we all should, but we just got to watch who goes to where.
Appreciate the question so much, and definitely take your point. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and go to closing remarks, because I know you've got a meeting coming up soon. And so we're going to start with Mrs. Eisenhower and let you, General, have the last word.
Again, I just want to say thank you for including the military family, the military spouses. I would say to all of us, remember you have a voice, and that feedback is important. General George mentioned today AFAP, Army Family Action Plan. It was, to me, a bigger production years ago when we would come together and you would have these days-long conferences. We don't need to do that. You can go onto the website, and here's where we need to work on that messaging as well to make sure that families know where to find it. But they can give us those ideas and give us that feedback and that insight so that we can change and meet their needs. We don't necessarily know at our ages exactly the best way to communicate, and that's what we need to find out so that we can present that information. So know that your voice matters, and we want to hear your voice, and please share your thoughts, your insight, your needs, your questions, your concerns, and also your success stories, because as we've already mentioned, we're not the best at telling the good stuff too.
I'm not going to say much different. First, thank you for being here today. I know it's the conference is starting to wind down, and I appreciate your presence and your interest. And it reinforces how important these topics are in taking care of soldiers. Because if we don't take care of soldiers, DAs, civilians, and families, we're not going to have combat-ready formations, as the chief said just yesterday in his comments at the launch. I want to thank everybody involved with putting this on, from AUSA and sponsoring to all of the folks that are working here to make it well lit and our voices clearly heard. And then Patty and Sir and Cheryl, thanks for joining me here on the stage and being able to tell our story. I would just ask you to never stop reiterating the value of providing us honest feedback. We're going to react to it. And we've got multiple mechanisms now, I think, especially in the digital age, that lets us address issues quickly. I think I made a lieutenant very nervous when he submitted a CG hotline about 5 weeks ago, and in 30 seconds, I was calling him at home. But that is, I think, emblematic of the obligation we have as leaders, that we're going to solve problems, but until we know about them, we're not going to be able to react as quickly. So please, in your roles, from the strategic all the way down to the tactical, please continue to encourage soldiers and family members. use the mechanisms that exist, or simply pull us over in a hallway, give us your feedback, because we've got the ability to reconcile priorities by installation with those of the secretary and the chief, and we can do that to their advantage. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Just three things, and first I'll echo General Eisenhower's thank you. So first, IMCOM professionals in the room, can you just raise your hand if you would real quick? And we've got quite a few. Thank you. Thank you for what you do each and every day to take care of soldiers and families and support senior commanders. General Brown, sir, and the AUSA team, just thank you. Wonderful 3 days and great to be able to be here on Wednesday afternoon, and for all you all to turn out on Wednesday afternoon. Thank you for joining us. To both General and Mrs. Eisenhower, thank you. I think we did better this time than Bosnia 20 years ago, maybe. We'll see.
We were good back then.
Yeah, we were pretty good. But Patty, thank you as well. Secondly, if you think of IMCOM, if you think of a garrison, please remember we are the Army's home. And our job is to provide that home and support all those senior commanders that are out there across the Army so that as we tailor that, to be able to provide that experience to make sure that it's support of every Army unit, every Army soldier, family, civilian, soldier for life. And the last piece, you heard Cheryl talk about that every family member, soldier, civilian, soldier for life, you have a voice. And you heard Jim talk about part of our responsibility is solving problems. Please know that we embrace that, particularly at the garrison level. So if you have a problem, please know you have a voice, and whether it is childcare, going to CYS, housing, going to the Housing Service Office. If you want to talk about spouse employment and you're not even sure what you want to do, you want to think about spouse employment, go see Army Community Services, right on down the line. There is probably a program that is out there that can help solve that problem for you, and you have a voice, and we want to hear it to make sure that we are doing the things to support you, support your family, support the senior commanders that are out there. But I really appreciate the time today. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been an incredibly honest and transparent conversation. I really appreciate all of the feedback and all of the comments that you all have made. I think that really just shows the Army cares about its people, because we're in a people business, so thank you so much. And on behalf of General Brown and AUSA, we all have these wonderful little gifts that we get to take home with us. Thank you very much, AUSA, and thank you all for attending.
Everybody, great day. Thank you. Thanks.